I hope you're all well today. Let me ask you this right up front. How do you feel when you hear the words government shutdown? Do you shrug it off? Or does it make you worry about what might actually stop working in your daily life? Well, we may be heading straight for one, and this time the spotlight is on President Donald Trump and Democratic leaders in Congress. So, let's break down what's going on and why it matters to all of us. Right now, Democrats in Washington, people like Senate Leader Chuck Schumer and House Leader Hakeem Jeffries, are basically saying, Mr. President, we need to talk. They've demanded a face-to-face meeting with Trump as the deadline to keep the government-funded looms closer and closer. And when I say closer, I mean September 30th. That's just days away. If Congress doesn't pass a spending agreement by then, large parts of the federal government could shut down. Now here's where it gets interesting. Democrats aren't just asking for more time or a blank check to keep things running. They're focused on something pretty specific: healthcare. They want to make sure Affordable Care Act subsidies are extended so people don't suddenly see their insurance premiums skyrocket. And they want to protect Medicaid funding, which helps millions of low-income Americans access healthcare. Their message has been clear: no deal if these protections are stripped away. So, what's the other side saying? Republicans, who control both the House and the Senate, have already put forward a temporary funding plan. On the surface, it sounds pretty straightforward. It keeps the government running at current levels while negotiations continue. But here's the catch. Their plan leaves out the healthcare provisions Democrats are fighting for. So we're basically in a stalemate. Let me throw a question out there. Do you think it makes sense to tie big policy debates like healthcare to these short-term funding bills? Or should they be handled separately, so we don't keep ending up at the edge of a shutdown? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Here's why time is such a big problem right now. September 30th is the deadline, and Congress has already been on recess, which eats into the little time they had left. The Senate even rejected one of the Republican stopgap bills, which just ramps up the pressure. Trump himself hasn't exactly calmed the waters either. He's hinted that a shutdown could happen, but added that the government would still cover things like military pay and Social Security. Still, anyone who remembers past shutdowns knows that it's never that simple. Federal workers get furloughed, contractors miss paychecks, national parks and museums close, and regular people end up caught in the middle. So the big question is, will both sides blink before the clock runs out? Democrats are betting that the public doesn't want to see healthcare protections gutted. Republicans are betting that voters just want the government to stay open without piling on new spending. And Trump? He may be calculating which move puts him in the strongest political position. Let's think about the stakes here for a minute. First, healthcare access. If ACA subsidies lapse, millions of families could suddenly be paying a lot more for health insurance. If Medicaid is cut, people who rely on it might lose care altogether. That's not just a budget debate. That's people's lives being affected. Do you think healthcare should be a non-negotiable part of any funding bill, or should it be treated like any other line item in the budget? Second, the politics. Shutdowns are almost always unpopular. They frustrate voters, disrupt services, and make Washington look dysfunctional. The real fight isn't just about policy. It's about who the public blames if things grind to a halt. And third, there's the economic side. Even a short shutdown can ripple through the economy. Federal workers without paychecks, delayed services, uncertainty in markets. It adds up quickly. And maybe the bigger, long-term issue is this. If every budget fight becomes a game of chicken, where one side says, give us what we want or the government shuts down, how sustainable is that? What does it do to people's trust in the system? So, as we count down the days to September 30th, we're left with a pretty clear picture. Democrats want Trump to personally come to the table. Republicans want a clean short-term bill. And Trump is, well, Trump. He hasn't given a clear answer on whether he'll meet with Democrats, but the clock is ticking either way. If there's no breakthrough, we could all wake up to headlines about a government shutdown, with ripple effects across the country. Now I'll toss it to you. What do you think is the right move here? Should Democrats dig in on healthcare protections, even if it risks a shutdown? Or should they compromise to keep the government open? And do you think Trump will actually sit down with them, or is he going to play hardball to the end? That's where we'll leave it for now, but this story is moving fast and we'll keep following it. If you found this breakdown helpful, please give this video a like. It really helps more people see it. And if you want to stay up to date on big stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss the next update. And hey, share this video with a friend who loves talking politics. I guarantee it'll spark a debate. Thanks so much for spending a few minutes with me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Hey my guys, we've got a big story unfolding in Washington, and it's one that could affect millions of people across the country. President Donald Trump is preparing to meet with top Democratic leaders, and the clock is ticking down toward a possible government shutdown. Now, I know government shutdowns might sound like one of those politics in DC things, but the truth is they ripple out and impact everyday life, from federal workers to healthcare access and even basic government services. So let's dig into what's happening, why it matters, and what could happen next. And as we go along, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. So here's where things stand. The U.S. government needs new funding before September 30th, or else it runs out of money to keep operating. Right now, Congress is split. Republicans in the House passed their version of a short-term funding bill to keep the government open until late November, but Democrats are pushing back hard. Their main issue? Healthcare. They want protections included in the deal, things like extending subsidies under the Affordable Care Act and reversing cuts to Medicaid. Republicans, on the other hand, are pushing for what they call a clean resolution, basically, a bill that funds the government without adding extra policy changes. And this is where the tension really heats up. Democrats feel like they've been left out of the process, claiming Republicans have been pushing forward without them, while Republicans argue that their proposal is reasonable and Democrats are just stalling. With the deadline less than a week away, Democratic leaders Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries asked for a face-to-face with President Trump himself. And surprisingly, Trump agreed. The meeting is expected later this week. Now, I want you to pause for a second and think about this. Do you believe a meeting like this can actually change the course of negotiations? Or is it more of a political show? It's easy to be skeptical, especially since Trump has already suggested he doubts much progress will come out of it. But still, the fact that their meeting shows at least some willingness to talk. So, what's really at stake here? Let's break it down in simple terms. If the government shuts down, non-essential services stop, and federal employees could be furloughed without pay. That's thousands of families left waiting for their paychecks. National parks, passport processing, food safety inspections, all could be slowed or suspended. And on top of that, Democrats argue that without action now, millions of Americans risk losing access to healthcare assistance they depend on. Republicans say they want to avoid shutdown chaos, but argue that Democrats are using the deadline as leverage to push through policy changes. Here's a question for you. If you were in Congress right now, would you prioritize keeping the government open at all costs, even if it meant shelving healthcare protections for later? Or would you hold the line and risk a shutdown to secure those programs? That's the exact dilemma lawmakers are wrestling with. The truth is, both sides have a lot to lose politically. For Democrats, failing to protect healthcare could damage their standing with voters who see them as champions of affordable coverage. For Republicans, a shutdown under Trump's watch could anger the public, especially if it drags on and disrupts people's daily lives. Remember, historically, shutdowns usually end up hurting the party seen as the one digging in too hard. So, what are the possible outcomes? Well, there are a few scenarios. One is that both sides blink at the last minute and strike some kind of compromise, maybe not everything Democrats want, but enough for them to claim a win. Another possibility is a short shutdown, where the government closes briefly until the political pressure gets too intense for either side to hold out. And of course, there's the nightmare scenario, a prolonged shutdown with real consequences across the country. Now let's come back to that meeting between Trump, Schumer, and Jeffries. What could it actually achieve? At the very least, it could open the door to a better tone. Even if no deal is struck, just having the top leaders in the same room might make it harder for either side to claim they were ignored. It could also provide political cover. Republicans can say, "Look, the president met with Democrats," while Democrats can say, "We pushed for a seat at the table." But at the end of the day, it all comes down to whether either side is willing to budge on healthcare. And that brings us to you. Do you think these meetings are about solving problems, or Are they more about appearances and who gets to claim victory in the press? Sometimes in politics, perception is just as powerful as policy. Either way, the deadline is fast approaching and the pressure is building. Americans are watching closely, not because they love DC drama, but because this fight could impact their lives in very real ways. From healthcare coverage to paychecks to government services, the stakes couldn't be higher. So, as we keep an eye on this story, remember this isn't just about who wins or loses in Congress. It's about whether the people in power can come together, even when they disagree, to keep the government running and protect the citizens they represent. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today and diving into this important issue. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think we'll see a deal before the shutdown, or is America heading into another political standoff? And if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like this video, share it with a friend who follows politics, and of course, subscribe so you don't miss the next update. Until next time, stay informed, stay thoughtful, and take care. Hey all, and welcome. So, let's dive into something big that's unfolding right now in Washington. We've got a government funding deadline just around the corner, and instead of things moving toward compromise, tensions are actually heating up. President Donald Trump has just canceled a planned meeting with top Democratic leaders, and that decision has thrown even more uncertainty into the mix. With September 30th approaching, the risk of a government shutdown feels closer than ever. So, what's really going on here? Well, let's start with the basics. Every year, Congress has to pass spending bills to keep the government running. This time, Republicans, who currently control both the House and the Senate, have put forward what they call a clean funding extension. Their plan would keep the lights on through November 21st, without too many strings attached, just a little extra money for security needs in government buildings. On the other side, Democrats have a very different vision. They're pushing for a shorter extension, one that would last only until October 31st, but they want to attach several priorities. Think restoring some programs that were cut under Trump, reversing Medicaid reductions, bringing back funding for public broadcasting, and also reinstating extra Affordable Care Act subsidies that were originally put in place during the pandemic. Now here's a thought. Is it fair for Democrats to fold in these policy demands into a stopgap bill, or should those be handled separately? That's one of the key debates happening right now. There was supposed to be a high-level meeting later this week between President Trump and Democratic leaders, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. The goal was to negotiate a middle ground. But Trump abruptly canceled, saying their demands were, in his words, unserious and ridiculous. He even claimed their proposals would cost over $1 trillion and accused Democrats of trying to sneak in health care coverage for undocumented immigrants. He added that he'd be willing to meet again only if Democrats dropped what he sees as unrealistic demands. So, here's a question for you. Do you think walking away from the table strengthens Trump's negotiating hand, or does it just make him look unwilling to compromise? Of course, Democrats didn't stay quiet. Chuck Schumer came out swinging, saying Trump's refusal to meet shows he actually wants a shutdown. He painted Trump as someone who prefers ranting and hiding rather than working together. Hakeem Jeffries went even further, calling Trump's comments unhinged and accusing Republicans of running scared. On the flip side, Republican leaders like Speaker Mike Johnson and Senate Majority Leader John Thune are standing by Trump. They argue that Democrats are using the funding deadline to force through costly policies that have nothing to do with keeping the government open. It makes you wonder, is this a battle over money, or is it really a battle over power and messaging? The stakes couldn't be higher. If no deal is reached by September 30th, we'll see a government shutdown. That means thousands of federal workers could be furloughed without pay, national parks might close, and government services that millions of Americans rely on could be disrupted. On top of that, shutdowns usually create economic ripples. Markets don't like uncertainty, businesses with federal contracts could be left hanging, and everyday people might feel the impact in ways that aren't always obvious at first. Have you ever experienced a shutdown yourself? If so, you know it's more than just a political chess match. It affects real lives. So, what happens next? The Senate is expected to reconvene on September 29th, just one day before the deadline, to vote again on the Republican proposal. Time is extremely short, and it's unclear if either side is willing to give ground. Democrats say they're offering a way to keep the government open while addressing key priorities, but Republicans say those priorities don't belong in this bill. And let's be honest, both sides are playing not just to each other, but also to public opinion. At the end of the day, when the dust settles, who the public blames for a shutdown might matter as much as the shutdown itself. So here's where I want to hear from you. Do you think one side will blink before the deadline, or are we heading for yet another shutdown? And more importantly, who do you think the American people will blame if the government does shut down? Thanks so much for spending a few minutes with me today as we untangle this unfolding drama. If you found this video helpful or thought-provoking, make sure to give it a like, share it with a friend who follows politics, and of course, subscribe so you don't miss the latest updates. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and take care. Hey all, and welcome back to this channel where we explore different trending topics. Today, we got quite a story unfolding in Washington, and honestly, it says a lot about the mood on Capitol Hill right now. Lawmakers are canceling trips ahead of a possible government shutdown, and that's not something you hear every day. So, let's unpack what's going on, why these trips matter, and what all of this means for the rest of us. So here's the deal. Several congressional trips that were planned for next week have already been called off. Committees had scheduled official visits, including one that was supposed to head out to New Mexico to tour places like Los Alamos and Sandia National Labs. Another trip was being organized by the House Oversight Committee. But with the shutdown deadline just around the corner, lawmakers are deciding it's just too risky to go ahead. And when members of Congress are canceling travel, you know they're bracing for something serious. Now, you might be wondering, why cancel? Well, first of all, these official trips, called CODELs, rely on federal funding. If there's a shutdown, they simply can't go forward. But it's not just about the legal side of things. There's also the logistical headache. Flights, hotels, scheduling. All of that becomes a nightmare if the government closes its doors. Some lawmakers don't want to spend taxpayer money on non-refundable travel only to have everything canceled last minute. Makes sense, right? But here's the bigger question. What does this tell us about where Congress thinks things are headed? The fact that these cancellations are happening before the deadline suggests that confidence is pretty low that a deal will be struck. So, do you think this shows leaders are preparing for the worst, or is it just a cautious move? Let's zoom out for a second. The deadline to avoid a shutdown is midnight on September 30th. That's just days away. If no agreement is reached to keep funding the government, then we could see parts of the federal system grind to a halt. That means furloughs for federal workers, delays in services, disruptions to programs, all things that ripple out and touch everyday lives. And yet, Congress still seems stuck in a standoff. Why do you think it's so hard for them to find middle ground when the stakes are this high? The cancellations also carry a symbolic weight. They're not just about missing a trip, they're about signaling priorities. Congressional delegations often serve important purposes: oversight, research, fact-finding, relationship building. When those are put on hold, it says something about how serious lawmakers think this shutdown threat really is. What's interesting, too, is that some trips are still in limbo, not officially canceled yet. So it's like Congress is holding its breath, waiting to see if things collapse or hold together at the last second. Now, let's talk about what happens next. There are a few paths forward. Congress could pass a short-term funding bill called a continuing resolution, which would essentially kick the can down the road and buy more time to negotiate. That might keep the lights on temporarily, but it wouldn't solve the deeper disagreements about spending. On the other hand, if no deal is reached, we're looking at a shutdown that could last days, weeks, or longer, depending on how stubborn both sides decide to be. Which do you think is more likely, a quick patch or a painful standoff? And then there's the political side of this. If a shutdown does happen, who gets the blame? Democrats will point the finger at Republicans. Republicans will do the same to Democrats, and meanwhile, ordinary people who rely on government services or federal paychecks are the ones caught in the middle. It's almost like a game of chicken, but with real-world consequences. Do you think voters will remember who's responsible, or does the blame just get lost in the noise? Here's what I find most telling. When members of Congress start canceling their own plans, It shows the level of uncertainty and stress around this situation. They're not even confident they'll be able to leave D.C. because they may need to be locked in negotiations right up until the last moment. That's a pretty dramatic sign of how fragile things are right now. So, as we wait for the deadline, keep an eye on whether more trips get canceled, whether leaders start showing flexibility, and whether a short-term fix gets thrown on the table. It's going to be a tense few days, and the decisions made in these final hours could ripple far beyond Washington. I want to leave you with this thought. Government shutdowns aren't just about politicians fighting in the Capitol. They're about real people, workers, families, businesses, who feel the effects almost immediately. So when you see these headlines, it's worth asking, who really pays the price when Congress can't get its act together? Thanks so much for hanging out with me today and breaking this down. If you found this discussion helpful, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who's following the news, and subscribe if you want more updates as things unfold. And let me know in the comments, do you think we're heading toward a shutdown, or will Congress find a last-minute way out? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, take care, and I'll catch you in the next video. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I hope you're doing well today. Let's dive into one of the biggest stories unfolding in Washington right now, and trust me, this one could have a direct impact on millions of people across the country. We're talking about the looming government shutdown and President Trump's last-ditch effort to stop it from happening. So here's the situation. By midnight on Tuesday, if Congress doesn't pass a temporary funding bill, a large part of the federal government will officially shut down. That means many federal workers could be furloughed, services would be disrupted, and the political blame game would kick into high gear. Now, doesn't it make you wonder how something so important can come down to the very last minute almost every time? Right now, the main issue isn't just about keeping the lights on. It's about what gets included in that short-term funding bill. Republicans in the House pushed through a stopgap measure to extend government funding into November, but when it hit the Senate, Democrats blocked it.
Why?
Because they want to tie in healthcare provisions, specifically things like Affordable Care Act subsidies, Medicaid funding, and the release of frozen federal spending. Republicans argue that this bill should only deal with funding, while the bigger fights over healthcare and policy should come later. What do you think? Should funding bills stay clean, or is it fair to use them as leverage for other priorities? Here's where things get interesting. Just a few days ago, President Trump actually canceled a meeting with Democratic leaders, calling their demands ridiculous. But now, with the clock ticking, he's changed his mind. He's hosting a bipartisan meeting at the White House, bringing together House Speaker Mike Johnson, Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. These are the top 4 congressional leaders, and it's basically the last chance for a deal before the shutdown deadline. Both sides are already playing the blame game. Republicans say Democrats are stalling and holding up urgent funding with unnecessary demands. Democrats counter that without protecting healthcare access, they won't agree to just kick the can down the road. In fact, Chuck Schumer has said that if Trump spends the meeting ranting instead of negotiating, nothing will get done. Can you imagine being in that room? Do you think this will be a serious negotiation or just more political theater? Now, let's talk about what's really at stake. If the government shuts down, hundreds of thousands of federal workers could be sent home without pay, while others would be forced to work but still wait for their checks. Agencies could halt or delay important services, and programs people rely on would face disruptions. Social Security checks would still go out, but new claims might be delayed. And healthcare costs could rise for many Americans if subsidies lapse. So the consequences are very real, not just numbers on a page. It makes me wonder, do our leaders truly think about the everyday people affected by these standoffs? Or is it all just political bargaining chips? So, what are the possible outcomes of this big Monday meeting? Well, there are a few. 1, they could pass a clean funding extension, pushing the real debates to later. 2, they could strike a hybrid deal, where Republicans allow some temporary healthcare funding in exchange for concessions elsewhere. Or 3, they walk out with no deal, and the shutdown begins. Historically, shutdowns don't play well with the public. And with Republicans holding the White House and both chambers of Congress, a lot of the blame could land on them if things collapse. It's worth pointing out that even though Republicans have a majority in the Senate, they still need Democratic votes to hit the 60-vote threshold for most bills. That gives Democrats leverage, and they know it. Which makes me think, in high-stakes negotiations like this, is compromise even possible? Or is it all about who can better handle the blame once the shutdown hits? As the clock ticks down, one thing is clear. This Monday meeting could decide whether the government stays open or shuts its doors. Will the leaders put aside the drama long enough to reach a deal, or are we heading toward another messy shutdown? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think both sides will find common ground, or is a shutdown inevitable at this point? Drop your opinions in the comments, because this one affects everyone. Thanks so much for watching and spending some time with me today. If you found this breakdown helpful, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with others who might want to understand what's going on, and subscribe so you don't miss any updates as this story develops. Until next time, take care, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey all, and welcome. Let me ask you something right off the bat. How many of you have ever had a paycheck delayed or a bill come due at the worst possible time? Stressful, right? Now imagine that feeling stretched across millions of Americans because, as of today, the US government has officially shut down. Yeah, you heard that right. So, what happened? Well, at midnight on October 1st, funding for the federal government ran out. Lawmakers in Congress just couldn't agree on a spending plan, and that means huge portions of the government are literally grinding to a halt. And honestly, it's not just some political drama in Washington. It's something that's going to ripple through the lives of everyday people. Here's where the fight really got heated. Republicans in the House pushed through a short-term spending bill that would have funded the government until late November. But Democrats said no way, and for a pretty specific reason. They wanted to make sure health care subsidies under the Affordable Care Act were extended and that Medicaid wasn't slashed. They also raised concerns about cuts to public media. Now, Republicans argued, hey, let's fund the government first and deal with all these policy debates later. But Democrats refused, saying that without protecting health care and essential programs, the deal wasn't worth taking. So basically, it was a game of political chicken. Each side waited for the other to blink, and instead, the clock struck midnight and bam, shut down. And here's the thing, it's not just some symbolic gesture. Real people are about to feel the consequences. Government workers are now facing furloughs. That means hundreds of thousands of federal employees are either being sent home without pay or asked to keep working without knowing when their next paycheck will come. Imagine showing up for your job and not being told if or when you're going to be paid. How long would you last before panic set in? And then there's healthcare. If this drags on, up to 10 million people could lose vital Medicaid coverage, and around 20 million Americans could see their health insurance premiums skyrocket without those Affordable Care Act credits being extended. Can you picture being in the middle of cancer treatment or managing a chronic condition and suddenly wondering if you'll still have coverage next month? That's the kind of uncertainty hanging over millions of people right now. Now, of course, both sides are pointing fingers. Democrats are saying Republicans force their hand with unfair proposals. Republicans are saying Democrats should have agreed to fund the government first and sort the rest out later. The White House is already laying blame, too, calling Democrats' policy demands insane and warning that the shutdown could last a while because of the stalemate. But here's something interesting to think about. Polls show the public isn't really siding with Democrats on this one. In fact, one New York Times/Siena poll showed 65% of Americans said Democrats shouldn't let the government shut down over this fight. And another survey showed the blame is pretty split. 38% of people blame Republicans, 27% blame Democrats, and nearly a third blame both. What do you think? Do you think Democrats were right to hold the line on protecting healthcare, or should they have compromised just to keep the government running? And let's not forget, this isn't the first time this has happened. The last major shutdown was back in late 2018 into 2019, and that one dragged on for 35 days, the longest in U.S. history. People couldn't get basic services, paychecks stopped, families were left struggling, and the economy took a serious hit. If this new shutdown stretches on even a fraction of that time, It could cost billions of dollars and create lasting damage. So what's next? Honestly, no one knows. Both sides are talking tough, but at some point, they'll have to come back to the table. The question is, who's going to give in first? And while the political drama unfolds, the ones paying the price aren't the politicians. It's federal workers, families relying on Medicaid, people counting on affordable health care, and taxpayers who are just trying to live their lives without constant chaos in Washington. Let me throw another question your way. Do you think shutdowns should even be possible? Should politicians be allowed to essentially hold the government hostage during these budget fights, or should there be automatic funding measures in place to prevent this from happening? Because right now, every time we hit one of these deadlines, millions of people are left hanging in the balance. At the end of the day, whether you lean left, right, or somewhere in the middle, this shutdown is a reminder that politics isn't just about debates on the Senate floor, it's about people's lives. And until there's a real solution, the uncertainty continues. Thanks so much for watching. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Who do you think is more at fault here, and what would you do differently if you were in charge? If you found this breakdown helpful or interesting, don't forget to give this video a like, share it with your friends, and of course, subscribe for more updates and analysis. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Hey my people, I hope you're fine today. Now, let me ask you something. When you think about government workers, do you picture faceless bureaucrats in big offices? Or do you think about the people who keep the air safe to breathe, who inspect food, or who process the benefits millions of Americans rely on? Because right now, those people, the ones who actually make the government run, are living through a storm. As of October 1st, the U.S. government has officially shut down. That means hundreds of thousands of federal employees have either been furloughed without pay or told to keep working with no idea when their paychecks will come. And this isn't just about missed pay. For many, it feels like the ground is shifting beneath them because this shutdown isn't only about funding. It's tied to a much bigger plan that could permanently change what it means to work for the federal government. Let's break this down together. Right now, about 750,000 federal workers are impacted. Some are sent home, told not to do their jobs, while others are classified as essential and forced to keep working even though they won't see a paycheck until the government reopens. Imagine being in that position, still showing up every day, paying for gas, childcare, food, and bills, but your paycheck? It's just paused. How long could you keep that up? Here's where it gets even more unsettling. President Trump and his administration aren't just treating this shutdown as a temporary budget standoff. They're using it as a moment to push for massive, long-term cuts. Reports say agencies have been told to draw up lists of employees who could be terminated outright. The president himself reportedly said the shutdown is a chance to get rid of a lot of things we didn't want. Doesn't that sound less like a budget issue and more like a purge? Take the Environmental Protection Agency, for example. Out of 15,000 workers, only about 1,700 are staying on duty during the shutdown. And many of the people who normally prevent environmental disasters, who monitor air and water quality, who keep communities safe, that work is being put on pause or threatened by layoffs. Now think about that. If you cut deep into the ranks of scientists, inspectors, and safety staff, who really feels the effects? It's not just the workers, it's the public. It's all of us. And this isn't just happening in one agency. The U.S. Patent and Trademark Office already announced it would be laying off about 1% of its staff. And across the government, more than 100,000 federal employees have submitted resignations through something called a deferred resignation program. That's people saying, "I'm not waiting to get axed, I'll go now." It paints a picture of a workforce under siege. But let's pause here and think about the human side. Many of these workers aren't making six-figure salaries. They're middle-class people, often making under $100,000 a year. They're raising families, paying mortgages, helping their kids through school. Past shutdowns have shown us what happens. Workers drain their savings, max out credit cards, take on loans, or even turn to food banks. So, the real question is, how long can families survive on uncertainty before the damage becomes permanent? We've been here before. The last major shutdown back in 2018 and 2019 lasted 35 days and ended up costing the U.S. economy about $11 billion. And here we are again, but this time with the added weight of proposed permanent cuts, 300,000 jobs gone by the end of the year, if the administration gets its way. Can you imagine what losing that many public servants at once would mean for daily life in America? Some leaders are warning us already. Union representatives say this isn't just about politics, it's about weakening the very backbone of public service. They argue workers are being used as bargaining chips in a larger political game. One union leader put it bluntly, they're trying to extract these big changes on the backs of the public services our communities run on. That hits hard, doesn't it? Because if those services collapse, it's not just numbers on a spreadsheet. It's people who don't get inspected medicine, delayed social security checks, or slower emergency response times. Food banks are also bracing themselves. The head of Feeding America, the country's largest hunger relief network, warned that millions of households are just one missed paycheck away from needing help. And if this shutdown drags on, the wave of need could overwhelm already stretched-thin food banks. Think about how fragile that makes everything feel. One paycheck missed, and suddenly people who never imagined needing a food pantry are standing in line. But the workers aren't staying silent. On the very first day of the shutdown, labor unions filed lawsuits against the administration, calling the threats of mass firings not just illegal, but immoral. Everett Kelly, president of the largest federal employee union, called it unconscionable. And that raises another question. Should the government really be run like a business that can downsize on a whim, or is public service supposed to be something more stable, more protected? When you think about it, this isn't just about politics. It's about what kind of country we want to live in. Do we want a nation where public service is respected and protected, or one where it's disposable and constantly under threat? Do we want to build a workforce that attracts the best talent, or do we want one where workers live in fear of sudden layoffs? The truth is, shutdowns have ripple effects that go far beyond Washington. They hit small towns with federal facilities, they hurt families who rely on government jobs, and they even impact the broader economy. And now, with mass cuts on the table, the stakes feel even higher. So, what do you think? Should this shutdown be treated as just another political standoff, or is it a warning sign of a much deeper transformation in how the government operates? And if so, what does that mean for everyday Americans who depend on those services? I'd really love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Do you know someone personally affected by the shutdown? Do you think these cuts will actually make government more efficient, or do they risk hollowing out the very system that keeps the country running? Thanks so much for hanging out with me today and for diving into this important topic. If you found this video thought-provoking or helpful, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with a friend who might want to join the conversation, and of course, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next breakdown. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.